Now, I've worked a lot of gangsters over the years, and I've recognized that they have a code of their own code. I worked gangs in South Central Los Angeles for 2 years, and every group I came into contact with had their own code. I worked one guy who tortured a gang rival because that gang rival had made an unwanted advance on his sister. Didn't even touch her, just said something to her. So they captured that poor guy and tortured him to death. Was that right? They thought it was right because they had their own code. It was grounded in that individual, agreed upon by his gang member friends. But is that, I want you to consider the moral hierarchy we all live in. He, for example, has his own moral hierarchy. Jesse believed that he had his own personal beliefs, his own code. His gang to whom he belonged had their own decrees. But in California and Los Angeles, for example, you have to follow the municipal codes. That's one level above. These things dictate onto Jesse. These things dictate onto his gang. Not only that, there are penal codes in California that dictate onto Los Angeles, and there are federal laws that dictate onto California. And the United Nations would like us to believe, at least, that there are certain decrees that dictate onto the United States. My question for you is there yet another transcendent layer of moral responsibility? If there is, what could this be? I actually think there is a code up here. I'll show you what I mean. If Jesse thinks he's gonna go out and buy a car tomorrow, he might choose a crazy car. He might choose a red Yugo. I don't know, he likes red. But you know what, that's his personal choice. It works for him, but may not work for anybody else. But it's his choice, he can actually justify that moral decision. His gang, though, could say, no, Jesse, we don't drive those kinds of cars. That'll be spotted in a heartbeat. We drive cars that blend in. And this is what we drive. We park those cars wherever we want. So if you're gonna be part of our gang, you have to have that kind of car that works for us. It may not work for anybody else, but it works for us. Therefore, they are sufficient to establish that moral code. But you can't park your car anywhere you want in Los Angeles. We got laws. I don't care if you are a gangster and think you're somebody. You can only park in certain areas. If you want to live in LA, you got to bend your knee to that. That's true for all Angelinos. It may not be true for other cities, but there are places you can't park. That means that Los Angeles is sufficient for those kinds of laws. But you know what? If you park your car on the street, you better have a tag on it from your registration, because in California, without that, you're going to get a ticket. It may not be true for all states, but it's true for California. And that means that California is a sufficient grounding for that law. Now, to be honest, you may not have your tag on your car in every state, but every state says you got to register your car. So it turns out registration is a national issue. It may not be that way in every country, but it's true for all Americans. And that's why the American law system is sufficient to justify that law. Well, wait a minute. How about this? Let's get out of the United States for a second. What about on the international level? Let me give you a crazy law. Is it ever okay to use a car bomb in your car? I think, well, could you argue this? I think that the United Nations would say this is true for everyone, but some people in the group of the United Nations would say, no, actually, we think that we are unjustly being treated. We can actually save more lives by killing a few with a car bomb. We think we're justified in this regard. So we would say, not necessarily. Not necessarily true for everyone. So it seems like, this is where the law stops, really at the United Nations level. Can you think of any laws that transcend the United Nations? They're already starting to argue about this law at the United Nations. Actually, I think we can. Is it ever okay to use a car bomb just for the fun of it? Would any nation say that was okay? Well, no. Once you take out some kind of a justification, you say for the fun of it, now we all agree. This is a law that transcends every nation, everywhere on the planet at any time in history. It's not just the car bomb law. It's never been okay to torture someone for the fun of it, to steal for the fun of it. Do you see, if you just add for the fun of it, at the end, you're gonna find a set of universal, transcendent, objective laws that transcend every nation. They're not made here, they're not made here, they're not made here. As a matter of fact, even if it's just Jesse, they apply to Jesse. But if we're in a Star Trek universe in which there's a confederation of planets, they would also apply to the Klingons and the Romulans. They actually transcend species. They transcend the planet. Where do these kinds of transcendent laws come from? That's the problem. They're in this outer ring. But what's that outer ring? We know one thing for sure. All moral laws are about personal obligations. Did you know that? Think about it. I am not personally morally obligated to my police vehicle, and I am not personally morally obligated to my flashlight, and I am not morally obligated to the laws of physics either. You are not morally obligated to inanimate forces. You are only morally obligated to persons like your partner or like the people in your city. That means we're looking for something at each level that is personal. Whatever it is that transcends the outer ring, it cannot be an impersonal force of physics because you would not be morally obligated to that. I'm looking for a transcendent person to whom I am morally obligated. See the problem? This is why Dawkins, who rejects the transcendent moral person, at least recognizes that there is no objective transcendent moral person. The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect. If there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, and no good. Nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. The problem is, in order to explain objective moral truths from inside the room, you've got to do it a number of ways. One, you can just say there are no moral truths. It's all an illusion. Or you could say, you know what, they're the product of some kind of cultural convention. Really? Tell the Nazis that. Who gets to decide who's right if it's one culture against another? Is it the strongest culture gets to decide? Well, get ready to accept everything the Chinese believe because they outnumber us. Cultures don't decide moral truth. I showed you that hierarchy for that reason. Are they just human-specific facts that emerge through genetics? Oh, really? Well, then try telling somebody that you shouldn't behave that way. My genetics are different than yours. Sorry. My genetic history is different than your genetic history. Sorry. Moral laws don't come from genetics. So any effort to stay inside the room to give you objective, transcendent moral laws fails for any number of reasons. Instead, we need a referent that transcends all of us that happens to be personal. And that's why you're stuck outside the room again. Here you are looking at what Jerry Footer, who's not even a Christian, says this. Science is not about facts. It's about facts, not norms. It might tell us how we are, but it couldn't tell us what is wrong with how we are. There couldn't be a science of the human condition. You can't get this from physics. This is something you get a different way.